Now let's talk a little bit about the public company integrated audit. Now, anyone can get an integrated audit, right? As we've mentioned before, what's the drawback in getting an audit? It's just expensive. It's just expensive and requires a lot of work. So if you don't need an audit, you probably won't get an audit. I mean, technically, I could have a company making $100,000, which, grand scheme of things, is pretty small compared to the companies we'll be talking about, and I could get an audit, but it might not be worth it. Slash, it's just right. There's got to be a reason. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. However, when we have public companies, we're following the PCAOB, we're following the SEC, we're following all these other regulations, and there are specific criteria you need to follow, especially if A, these companies are big enough, but B, they're publicly traded, and you got to protect those investors. Now, public companies with market capitalizations, meaning market cap, if you don't remember that from FAR or VC, that's just the amount of shares outstanding times the value of each share. That's the total value. If you wanted to buy the company today for all it's worth, that's what you'd have to pay out. Companies with market caps of more than $75 million must undergo an integrated audit that only a CPA can sign off on. Privately held companies are not required, right? Privately held companies are subject to as much scrutiny because the general public can't invest in them. The CPA firm must express an opinion on management's internal control report, which is not done during a normal audit. During the normal audit, you do have to get that management opinion on internal controls, but you're not expressing an opinion on that. You're only expressing an opinion on the financial statements as a whole. Remember that. While a normal audit is going to focus on financial statement material misstatements, and they only give an opinion on the financial statements as a whole, integrated audits take into account the internal control and express an opinion on them. Kind of not going in circles, I'd say, but I'm kind of beating this to death because, as I've made a point here, this can be confusing. It really is. Understanding the differences here, and when I was first taking the exam, when I was studying, I did not have it explained to me properly, so I want to make sure that it is drilled down to a T for you. So, as we said before, you can really get any audit. I mean, this is just my take on it. The take also it's the truth. I mean, any company can get an audit. They can get an integrated audit. Any company can do whatever they want. It's kind of like, oh, you're going above and beyond to get extra certainty over your financial statements in your company. Good for you. I'm happy, but it's not necessary, not required. No one's requiring you to do it, right? You can go to the dentist every week if you want, but I mean, I guess it's not required that you go to the dentist every 6 months either, but hey, that's a similarity there. Now, this last part, pretty important part to keep in mind. Due to the reliance on internal controls derived from the opinion expressed on them, auditors may prefer an integrated audit as less substantive testing may be required. Okay, important point there. Now, we have our audit risk formulas, which we'll go into much in depth in the audit risk lesson. Now, the overall audit risk, the risk that something in the audit goes wrong, the financial statements are wrong, equals inherent risk, the risk of the company just inherently being a complex company, or there just being a lot of fraud in there, just inherently anything that could go wrong, which we do not have control over, times control risk, which we have, I wouldn't say we have control over this, but we have the ability as an auditor to uncover more control risk. And detection risk. Detection risk is the risk that we do not detect something as the auditor and that a misstatement gets through. Now, control risk, how do we uncover more control risk, or how do we get an accurate number here? We do more tests of controls. And how do we, because this is the only part of the formula that we have control over, how do we reduce detection risk? Well, we do more tests of details, also known as substantive testing. Now, let's assign arbitrary numbers, which we can do. Now, these numbers don't mean anything. They're completely arbitrary. Let's say this is 1. Say overall this equals 10. And there we go. Definitely an awful 10. Now, multiplied by, let's say, 5 here, and say multiplied by 2. So now, our audit risk equals 10. Detection risk is quite small. And let's say we wanted to reduce detection risk even further. We would do more substantive testing. However, in this case, let's say you want to do less substantive testing, and many reasons, right? Substantive testing could be more expensive, more costly, more time-consuming. So what you could do is actually do more tests of controls, bring this down to 2, maybe do less. So like we're essentially letting go, or we're letting possibly more risks happen here. But overall, the risk to the audit is still the same. It's still 10. 1 times 2 times 5. Now you see here, again, just to reiterate what happened, these are arbitrary numbers, and they represent sort of the general amount of work done in each of these areas. And inherent risk you have no control over, so that's not going to change. Control risk, you can sort of, like, you essentially are doing more tests and controls to see what the risk is, and from there you can then go to the company and say, hey, we discovered your cash reconciliation or cash application process is lacking in security, and there's fraud getting through. They can then assess that, they can then fix that, and then this number would go down. Detection risk is where you're actually doing your procedures, confirmations, inventory counts, anything like that. So you can do less work as long as you essentially bolster it here. Now that's a nice brief overview. Again, we will dive into this immensely in depth in the audit risk lesson. But again, the purpose here, substantive testing could be expensive, costly, time consuming, and here's your option. If you have such certainty over the internal controls of a company, then you might not need to test a lot. If every single part of the company is a well-oiled machine and there's no fraud or errors that can get through, you may not need to test a lot, and that might be actually better for the sustainability of the company because they don't need to worry about an auditor coming in every year. And even if the auditor does have to come in every year, at least they can trust that their internal controls have the ship sailing straight.
Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.